Everything is personal right here. Everything is personal right here.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Everything is Personal. And today we have Dr. Abraham Benavides. Did I pronounce your name correctly, by the way? I never asked you how to pronounce it. Am I close?
Actually, you impressively got it right. Most people don't.
Cool,
Yeah,
cool.
you got it right. Most people don't. But people also will call me Dr. Abe. It's an easy one, too.
All right, Dr. Abe. So I wanted to ask you, you were maybe one of the first people to bring cannabis education into a medical school in the US. First of all, I wanted to understand the process of doing that and then the motivation behind that.
Okay, yeah, great. So you're referring to the work I did back in 2016 when I started the Cannabis as Medicine Interest Group. That was at the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences, where I did med school, and that's where when I came to med school, it was cannabis was just legalized in the district the year before, and through Prop 71 in 2015. But when I got there, I realized that we weren't actually learning anything about cannabis or the endocannabinoid system. And I looked online and I reached out to other experts to see, why this was the case or what we might be able to do about it. Because, I had heard and had read some research about how it was helping a lot of people and how this is something that seems to be pretty, it's new, but it's pretty safe and effective. And so I said, why don't I network with some local experts and professionals who can bring that high quality data and education to the medical school? Because in order to get things into the medical curriculum, ACGME or the accrediting council controls all of that. And so endocannabinoid system simply isn't in medical school curriculum as a standard, because cannabis has been outlawed for centuries. And so for decades. And so the way I went about it was I actually went to the first Cannabis Congress on Capitol Hill, where I listened to Dr. Malik Burnett. He was one of the co-chairs of Prop 7 of Initiative 71 that legalized in the district, and he's also a medical doctor. And I asked him, what can we be doing at the medical school level to increase awareness or education among providers? And he actually gave me the idea, which was why don't you start like an educational club or an interest group? And then I was like, well, that's great. Maybe you can be a speaker at our group. And so I went back to my med school, and then I got, green light from one of the deans who's a psychiatrist, and he was very, behind it, as well as I met a very important figure in my life, Dr. Mikhail Kogan, who is a world-renowned cannabis research expert, who happens to be now my colleague at the GW Center for Integrative Medicine. And so he became my faculty sponsor for the group, and he actually gave me the materials that I needed to start learning for myself more in depth about the endocannabinoid system and how it works. And then I reached out to other professionals in the area, so including Dr. Burnett, but also Dr. Ryan Vandry, who's a big research figure at Hopkins, and also Dr. Patricia Fry, who is a very big local practitioner in the Tacoma Park area in Maryland, I believe. So I was able to get these people to come and give presentations to interested medical students that I would host on our lunch hour, basically. So in med school, we have these lunchtime talks, and whoever's interested in whatever fields in medicine can go listen to a talk about it. There's an ortho group, there's a cardiology group, there's et cetera. And I created the first cannabis group. And it was a hit. I mean, at our first meeting, we had over 70 med students attending, and we ran out of pizza that I had ordered to share. More people showed up than they had indicated on the survey that wanted to come. And it's very interesting to see how, like, among my peers, cannabis as a medicine was received kind of mixed. I'd say probably about half of them thought that I was, crazy or high or both. And then the other half thought, well, maybe there's something to this. I think I should just learn about it objectively from the data. And, a lot of them kept an open mind. And so eventually this also led to a research project that I did while I was at GW, where I led a survey, a school-wide survey among all class years that was very simple. It only asked 5 questions, but I think the most impactful takeaways from it are that over half of the medical students were running into a canna-curious patient, meaning a patient who had a question about medical cannabis. But that same portion, over half of the students, felt entirely unprepared to counsel the patient on it. I think only 2 students marked that they were prepared over the 100 and 20 plus participants we had in the study from all 4 years. And so this showed the basic problem, which is that patients are demanding this medicine, patients are finding it effective, or are just curious about it, just have really simple questions. And I just felt that as doctors, it's our responsibility to investigate and all possible avenues and weigh risks and benefits. And so that's all I've tried to do at my school, is try to bring people who have the evidence, and then you can make your own decisions from it if the student want to incorporate it in their practice later or not. And then so that was really my contribution to the field of academic cannabis medicine in med school. And then since then, I started working in the industry after I graduated. And so, by now I have peer reviewed and co-authored over 500, cannabis science articles related to health. And so far have reached a global audience of over 2 million people through my clients at Veriheal, CBD Oracle, Canna-Keys. And so I've continued on since then. While I'm still at GWC, I am as a contact for CanMig, and I do teach medical students who rotate through and are interested in medical cannabis. So sometimes I'll do mentoring with them, and then sometimes I'll do some teaching with them too.
But is that actually a curriculum class? Like, the reason why I'm trying to figure this out, because I agree with you 100%. We have a medical system that is supposed to teach us all the different systems within our bodies as healthcare professionals, and is supposed to guide patients into, whatever treatment protocols are available for them. But if you're going through medical school and you're going through university, and a system that's a primary modulating system in your body is not being taught and has to be taught through a lecture of during lunch, there is no curriculum for that. So how do we bridge this gap? Because, as you said, we have canna-curious patients. People want to get some relief, or they want to alleviate a symptomatic condition or some of that, and there's treatments available for them. But if the doctors don't know that, and there's still a stigma associated with that, because you're talking 2 complete separate things. You're talking about an endocannabinoid system with endogenous, molecules, and you're talking about a plant that is exogenous, and there's no separation when you have these conversations with healthcare professionals. But I think there needs to be, because you have to separate a system and what's going on in your body versus, plant medicine. So I just want to get your thoughts and opinion of, did we bridge the gap from 2016, which seems to be like a very long time ago, to where we are today?
Yeah, well, this is something that is a lot of pioneering advocates are working on. Well, especially Dr. Kogan, like I said, my colleague and my mentor, he is really big on this, like advancing it into academia. And so he's published other papers with other researchers from around the world to basically to further demonstrate this need, like build on this kind of work. But then basically you need to keep lobbying the administrators of what's called the LCME, the Liaison for Committee on Medical Education, is the people who determine what's taught in medical schools. And medical schools also largely teach the test. There's a standardized test that's given out by the NBME, the National Board of Medical Examiners. And they have standards that need to be taught in med school to be passed. So there's problem with the centralized control. I mean, it's a good way to keep quality checked, but the problem is it gatekeeps good information like this out because of, like you said, it's just rooted in outdated stigma and bias.
I wanted to, go to your own sort of journey and story. So I wanted to understand, was there a certain catalyst in your own personal journey in terms of cannabis medicine? And it's one thing to talk about it from an academic standpoint, but is there a personal story that you can share how cannabis may have come into your life?
Yeah, definitely. It's not necessarily directly, but in a way. So my story really begins here, actually, in the town where I live in. So I live in Cartagena, which is a small town in Guanacaste in Costa Rica. My great grandmother was one of the original 12 settlers of this town, and she was a tropical healer, tropical remedy healer, and a midwife who would go around on horseback and help deliver babies and heal the sick and heal animals too, just based on what she learned from oral tradition. And all of that is really based in botanical medicines. And she even used things including psychedelics. I don't know that she had used, cannabis or hemp in her healing, but I feel that that's something that she would have approved of. And that's basically what inspired me to look into that angle. And so when I heard all this business on the news about a plant, and I thought, well, why are people politicizing this so much? And then, yeah, so she was really my inspiration for me to start thinking through this lens of botanical medicines and medical cannabis. And she was into the psychedelics, which is also something that I strongly support out there too. And so I feel like she would be proud, because now I'm living in the same town that she did years ago. And she was also a forward thinker, as well. She would use my great grandfather's moonshine as antiseptic during a time when, germ theory was still being debated in the West. This was late 1800s, and so but they just knew if you use this liquid it causes less sickness. And so it really is about focusing on the wellness of the people and the outcomes. And so I thought, this is a botanical medicine with good outcomes, good safety. This is something that needs to be researched and advanced further, and so that's how I found my niche.
So I was going to ask you where you grew up, but you just talked about it. Talk to me about you as a child. First of all, were your parents together? Do you have siblings, or what was your family dynamic like?
Yeah, actually, so my parents were immigrants from Costa Rica to the United States. So they immigrated in the early 90s. I was born in 92 in Queens, New York. And I have two older brothers that are fun. It's funny because they grew up to be law enforcement. So my brothers are cops. One of them is a detective with San Diego Police Department. And the other one actually works for DEA, which makes for a hilarious Thanksgiving meetups.
Do you ever put some cannabis in his pocket when he goes back to work? Like, shit.
I don't, but I should. That would be great.
Fun. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're in California, so when I'm there and you see me using it, I'm like, "Hey, bro, it's the law.
It's legal. It's legal." Yeah. So that's cool. As a kid, when you're growing up as an immigrant too, what were your interests? Was healing part of sort of what you were into? Were you into sports? Were you into did you always desire to be a healthcare professional?
Yeah, I remember my parents gave me this fake little doctor's toolkit that was for preschool age kids, and I loved that toy since I was a kid. And I did like the idea of helping and serving other people. This was also modeled through my dad. My dad is a retired pastor, retired senior pastor of the United Methodist Church. And so that is, his work was how we got housing, because the church provides housing. And that's basically how we survived, was through working in the church. And I met a lot of other people from all different types of socioeconomic and different demographic backgrounds. People, and we were serving a community that was largely Afro-Caribbean and also Hispanic, Latino based. So this was in Jamaica Plain and JP in Boston. So I was born in Queens, New York. 2 weeks later, my parents moved me out in a shoebox to Boston, so my dad could start his ministry and his theological studies at BU. And so he's really what inspired me to pursue higher education and serve other people, because I saw him working as a pastor and being able to meet all these people from different backgrounds. It really inspired me to go into family medicine, because I just enjoyed meeting everyone from people who are my age as a kid to the older people, and them sharing their stories and their food and their culture. And I just really enjoyed being around that. So the social aspect of being in the church is something that is kind of overlooked, but I think was really important to me foundationally, because it gave me the social skills I needed to be able to just meet people where they're at, see, hear about their lives, listen to a story without judgment, and, basic things like that. And so how to have respect for people who are less fortunate than you. And so, and even us as immigrants, there are people who are less fortunate than us. That's true. And so it was really impactful. That's where I grew up, and I spent, most of my childhood in Boston, Mass. Then we also lived for a year in West Newton. I lived for a year in San Diego with my brothers, also Pittsfield, Mass, Southern New Hampshire, and then I went to DC for med school.
So in practicing, Western traditional pharmaceutical guided medicine, did you have a specific moment, or was this a gradual kind of thing where you noticed that maybe this type of approach of sick care is not really efficacious for, the patients you're serving? Let me kind of look elsewhere or outside of what is being recommended by traditional therapeutics, and what is sort of the Western approach to healthcare. I have air quotes when I say healthcare, because you're really talking about sick care because it's symptomatic, right? So what you're doing is the idea, and it's all set up this way. Insurance is set up this way. The pharma industry is set up. We have this routine, right? And I'm not a healthcare professional, so I'm going to defer to you as the professional. But from my perspective as just a sciencey type of person, if I watch the way the healthcare system works, it's especially what's insurance based. You have a condition. Usually it's related to pain or something like that. You go to a doctor. The doctor says, okay, let me see what I can do, something to alleviate the pain, which is actually a symptom of maybe another condition. You feel better. You think you had a successful experience. The doctor does no harm, didn't harm you in any way, even though there are side effects maybe of the protocol that's being recommended, but the side effects are expressed by the pharmaceutical company who created that. Here you go. So now it absolves me of any liability per se, because I'm still part of representing my Hippocratic oath, do no harm. I give this to you, you feel better, the actual pain subsided. So you and I as a healthcare, we both collaborated, and now we have a successful experience. However, that pain comes back maybe in my elbow 3 months down the line, and you repeat, rinse and repeat, and you go through this cycle again without ever questioning, why am I experiencing this pain? Maybe there's a root cause that's coming from somewhere else. So I wanted to understand if you've experienced, this yourself as a healthcare professional, or was there something else? Was there like one moment where you say, all right, you know what, let me investigate, or was this a gradual kind of thing that led you down looking at botanical and plant medicine?
Great question. I'm not sure I totally captured it, but I think what you're asking is how do I kind of marry traditional Western medicine?
My question, I'll make it a simple question. Was there a moment in your practice that you said, okay, you know what I'm using, my toolbox right now that I have is limited. Let me look outside of that toolbox to see if there's anything else that I can utilize. Or was this a gradual thing that's you sort of realized over time?
Yeah. Okay. So I really saw it. I mean, like I mentioned, I saw it a lot during my medical training. So not necessarily the first 2 years of training, which is mostly teaching to a test in lecture halls. In the last 2 years of med school, you're out in the field and meeting people and learning how to interview and again take histories and do the work of a doctor, a sergeant too. And so what I kept running into, and especially in the because I trained in the DC area. And so DC and Virginia were most of my training locations. And I met a lot of people who there is a lot of chronic need that is in those areas. And so seeing the chronic pain needs being unmet for, anyone from minorities to women, seeing other needs being unmet by traditional treatments during my training. And then some patients turning around and telling me, well, I actually use some cannabis since it was legal in the district or some whatever, and this is actually what's helping. And so me just noting that patient by patient by patient is, that's what inspired me towards the end of my school year to create the survey that I had mentioned and say that, yeah, this is something that you need to be considering because I've met, a lot of patients through pain clinic or through the integrative medicine service or even like surgical patients and people of like almost, endocannabinoid system is virtually attached to every organ system and as well as being its own arguable organ system in and of itself too. And so it's just something that I saw we naturally needed to learn about because we can't be blind to it. And especially if patients were coming to me and telling me, and several times in my rotations, that this is just something that they used and this is what was helpful.
I mean, at least you were open enough as a healthcare professional to listen to your patients and see, like, if somebody says, "Hey, I'm using Epsom salt, every day for my bath." It's not part of my practice. I don't have I'm not going to write you a prescription, but I can see that there's a pattern. You're going to investigate that a little bit. And, most healthcare professionals, I'm not going to say most, but a lot of healthcare professionals, they don't really listen to what the patient is responding.
Yeah.
They chalk it up to placebo. Oh, you know what? That's just placebo. That's your belief, and you believe you're getting better. Fine, that's fine. But it's not part of the pharmacopoeia or anything else that is part of my my toolbox. I'm curious, and I want to go into your personal journey with COVID and all those other things. Before I do that, I just wanted to. It's 2025 right now, and cannabis is legal in most of the United States and a lot of different parts of the world. But there still seems to be a stigma for many reasons because it's still a Schedule 1, which is confusing. Well, you were saying it's medicine, but it's still not medicine,
Right.
which makes no sense. But in your study and in your practice, are there still misconceptions that people have about medical cannabis? And so what do you feel those misconceptions are?
Yeah. I think probably the first one is the line, there's no research on this, which is hilarious to me. Working at Cannabis, which is like the PubMed of cannabis research. I'm the medical editor there. I see that we have thousands of studies. There's like 2,000 studies on just THC, 3,000 on CBD. And then, we have thousands of other studies categorized by organ system, terpenoid, medical condition, cannabinoid. And so, the overall quality of it is largely in the preclinical stage. And that is because of the federal restrictions on the research. But there is a lot of clinical research out there that's supporting it that is arguably larger than some approved drugs out there, and there's more papers for cannabis than there are things like Tylenol or Adderall. And so it's just like, well, those are legal. So why is this, goalpost for cannabis constantly being moved somewhere else when we probably have enough for it to be a first line treatment, I believe, for things like pain, especially, or anxiety instead of benzos. And so, that's, sorry, continue with the question?
Yeah, well, I mean, you answered it. That was the misconception. Okay. That is the biggest misconception about there's not enough research. And you also addressed the whole thing. Look, this is in my opinion, you're absolutely right that we have these limitations from the DEA and FDA. So there are drugs that go through their several phases, right? Phase 1, 2, 3, etc. But in cannabis, there's a lot of research, and there's a lot of research that I personally feel that is better than petri dish research. You actually have human studies. There are controlled studies. There are created just like you would do with a clinical trial with controls, but it's done with humans and patient-reported outcome with biometric studies and biomarker studies, etc. But the thing is, you're absolutely right. The goalpost keeps getting pushed. I feel pharma has a really hard time understanding something that has so many different molecules in it, right? So you're not just talking about an isolated, because they tried Marinol, etc. There's a lot of isolated synthesized molecules, and pharma is used to this. It's they take a plant, they synthesize, they say, forget everything else. We're going to just take a component of the plant. We're going to utilize that. Now we're going to go through a clinical studies. And they did that with Epidiolex, for instance, which is, approved. But you have terpenes, you have flavonoid, you have all these different components. So, part of me understands why, it's so difficult to be able to do a clinical trial. However, it's 2025. We have AI. There are ways to be able to treat all these different components and be able to guide them directly. I mean, I have a company that does DNA testing. We have a patent on the use of cannabis or the endocannabinoid system, use of DNA to make recommendations associated with the endocannabinoid system. So, I mean, there is a way to be able to structure research correctly. Do you feel that there are, besides, the things we mentioned, do you feel there's other forces in play, more political, more pharma, that are preventing cannabis from being truly used as a medicine, where people are reporting to you, and all the work that you've done, that it's efficacious?
Yeah, it's like you said, is largely politically controlled, unfortunately, and a lot of people don't understand how deep the divide and is in terms of racial bias as well. And this is something where when I meet a patient who holds heavy stigma, it's a matter of educating them on where that comes from and having them understand this is something that started with trying to oppress Black and brown people in the 1920s from voting and being able to criminalize and put them in jail and associate with them and bad things and things that are not true. Is this thinking that we should continue in 2025? That's up to you, but I think absolutely not. And so a lot of patients don't really realize that, oh, it's illegal because it's a racist policy, basically. And so I think I would definitely recommend, if you haven't read Isaac Campos's Debunking the Mexican Hypothesis, is a really great paper that I recommend to everybody who has this kind of stigma, because it really goes into showing people that, in the 1840s, most of our cannabis was being imported by pharmaceutical companies from India. We were importing Indian hemp. This is recorded. Cannabis did not come across the border from the south, from Mexico, and suddenly appear after the Mexican War. Now, there were injured war veterans and prisoners of war who were released and did partake in cannabis because they have chronic pain, they have PTSD, they are veterans of war. And so it became very popular among that community, and that's kind of how it got associated with Mexicans. But in reality, the Mexican community was not using it at any higher levels than white communities, other communities. When we look at this, people use kind of about the same amounts. It's just not really well recorded. But Isaac Campos does a really great job of showing, giving that background and that context, and also how that got just totally morphed and twisted during the 20th century to be weaponized by people like Henry Anslinger and people who, Richard Nixon, who have said outright racist things in the context of cannabis. And so that's the cement that is keeping the stigma together. So I try to dissolve that cement with education and telling people, look, if you think that still these days, that's being supported by this. And if you really want to keep thinking that, you need to understand that that's where that comes from. And I'm also personally a victim of, discriminatory policies and racist policies that were used disparagingly against me versus, my other colleagues who also used cannabis or did the exact same thing as me. And so, but I was punished for doing the same thing they did, even though there was no harms. And so the prohibitionist policies themselves are what is doing much more harm than the plant itself. The plant is doing little to no harm, and instead we have, weaponized industry of global conquest proportions fighting a fake war on drugs, which is just a war on people, and that's just sad.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we can go into a rabbit hole of William Randall Hearst and Anslinger, that you were talking about. But I want to, this policy of discrimination that still exists. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about your own experience in, if I remember correctly, surviving severe COVID and then having long COVID, and your own philosophy of healing, and if there was any shift that happened through, because it was your own experience, how you experienced that, and if you have a different mindset of dealing with COVID and how people were dealing with it.
Yeah. Okay. So I was a frontline worker back, in the height of the pandemic. I have, there's a time between medical school and one residency program and another where I faced institutional racism at a program, and I wasn't allowed to continue because of disparate policies. I moved on from that and matched into Seattle, but it was my first year on the job as a new doctor, and it was the height of the pandemic, and this was before we had the vaccine. So I was thrust in there and to a world we had never seen before, and it was very difficult. We had obviously long hours, high stress, high patient mortality, and just unpredictability on security. 6 months into my family medicine training in Seattle, I got COVID from an ICU patient that I was taking care of, and I would often have rosters full of COVID patients, but I got sick fine, on ICU service, and 2 days later, I woke up breathless, a dozen or so other symptoms. And just the medical system at that time was not very supportive of the healthcare workers like own well-being, and so my residency program pushed me into give me a little bit of time off, but then pushed me too soon into coming back to work, which resulted in me collapsing at work and ultimately ending up in our own ICU as a patient because they were not able to accommodate my disabilities and because we were so short staffed. And so I really gave it all my all, and I trusted them as my supervising doctors to say that would be okay. But I got really sick. I was in the ICU for a week. Afterwards, I spent 6 months doing speech therapy and just trying to relearn how to eat and speak and breathe without falling so short of breath. So for the listeners out there, I'm long hauler, and if you hear me breathy or short of breath, it's because I suffered brain damage that makes it difficult for me to coordinate my breathing and my speaking. And so I have been able to regain a lot of function over the last 5.5 years since I got sick in December 2020. But it's been a long time for me to feel, probably about 90% better by now, I think. But it's been a very long journey, and I do think that I think one of the things that helped prevent me from being intubated was cannabinoids, and based on the research that comes out that shows a lot of cannabinoids block the spike protein for COVID to infect and reinfect other cells by binding the spike protein. I was taking, over-the-counter stuff that was legal in Seattle, and I believe that that's what prevented a, fatal cytokine storm. But I was very sick, but thankfully I did not need to be intubated, and I would credit that to the use of cannabinoids, I bet. And so that's something that I think is personally meaningful. And since then, I've been I moved to Costa Rica here, so I was able to hit up some old contacts in the cannabis industry to get some more online work going because my physical condition is no longer predisposed to running around the hospital, doing CPR, performing minor surgery, labor delivery, things I was trained to do. And so there had to be a massive personal shift in my life, and the focus from becoming a traditional regular doctor to really becoming a healer in my own terms, because the word doctor comes from the Latin docere, which means to teach. And so a doctor is actually supposed to be a teacher. But I see that most doctors fail in that responsibility when it comes to cannabis. And so redefining success in my own terms has meant my new mission is to reach, teach, and heal as many people as I possibly can using or about the cannabis plant. And so far that's 2 million and going strong. And whereas if I was a regular doctor, I'd reach maybe a few thousand people over the course of a career. But in working in this kind of mass media and this kind of vein, I'm really able to do my own kind of advocacy by keeping a high quality, evidence-based articles through channels like VeriHeal, Cannakeys, CBD Oracle. And I've built some content there that is teaching thousands of other doctors and healthcare professionals about this. And that's, since I've been passionate about this in med school, it's really, it's kind of overwhelming to see things come full circle right now. And then I also split my time between, I do see some patients virtually as a health coach. And so I do kind of health coaching at the GW Center for Integrated Medicine just virtually while I live here. And so, you can book an appointment with me, and I help people who are, I usually help our most advanced or severe cases. And so Dr. Kogan trusts me to guide, our most severe cases, people with advanced dementia, people with severe metastatic cancer, people, and also post-surgical patients and milder cases too. But really, I see our most severe cases, and I help them using, the knowledge of cannabis science that I'm blending with my writing as well. And so these, I wear two hats as clinician scientist these days. And so it's really good for keeping me up to date. And also the practical aspect of working with people informs me about what is actually, what people prefer, what people like to use, how it's working for them, and other insights like that aren't necessarily published in the literature yet.
What's the biggest difference between, like, you're in Costa Rica in terms of cannabis policy or the perception of cannabis as medicine in the US versus Costa Rica?
Okay, yeah. So the law in Costa Rica is probably more open about it and more accepting of it, or at least colloquially or anecdotally, it's something that people do use to hang out. And if cops see you doing it, they'll just ask you to put it away or go somewhere private. It was decriminalized here back in, I believe, 2021, and then that's when we had the first cannabis congress in the capital, and I was invited by the Society of Cannabis Clinicians to speak as the youngest conference speaker there. And I talked about my personal experience with facing racism and overcoming that in medical school, and also presenting my study, my original research. So here things have, but since it was decriminalized to the point where the regulations for actually, production, exporting, sales of cannabis products actually happening. Those regulations just got published like 2 months ago, I believe, and so they've been waiting for like 4 years for the actual rules to get things going, and that's really a reflection of how bureaucratic processes work here in Costa Rica. We do have terrible bureaucracy in the United States. It's a little bit different though. I feel like here it's very slow, but it is incremental forward change. I feel like in the United States it's very wild mood swings. One day we're going to fully legalize it, the next day we're going to totally ban it. People always changing their minds. Versus here, it's kind of like, okay, we're getting there. People are working on it, and no one is really worried about it. It's just like it's already signed into law. It's being written. It's just slow. Whereas in the United States, we have conflicting talking points from political parties. You on both sides, and there's no clear choice other than, in my opinion, what should be a full descheduling of the plan entirely.
That was, you just took the words right out of my mouth. My question was going to be, and maybe we can elaborate on this. You have the ability to create a policy. What should be the cannabis or endocannabinoid policy in the US? And then we'll talk about the rest of the world. What should it be?
Oh, great. Yeah. Okay. So if I was president for a day or something, I would sign an executive order that would deschedule cannabis from and remove it from Controlled Substances Act. I'd probably do it with psilocybin too, and probably also things like MDMA and ketamine too, because we can turn those into medicines. And it's just
ketamine is already medicine, right?
Correct.
Ketamine is. So would you?
But there's a racemic form, and then there's like S-ketamine, which is the left-handed form. But yes, you're correct.
So maybe we'll look at it this way. MDMA failed in our phase 3, even though, I mean, what wonderful research has been done by MAPS and to
and highly effective too.
Highly
effective. Like 80% effective.
Incredible. And this is the political bureaucratic system that prevented this efficacious substance to be used for people who are struggling, like life or death situations, with veterans, etc. No, you can't use this as a drug. Why? So you have ibogaine, you have psilocybin, you have LSD, you have MDMA, cannabis, etc. So when you're saying descheduled, and I hate to confound this, but we've had prohibition with alcohol in the United States.
Yeah.
At one point, we removed prohibition. We didn't legalize alcohol. We just removed it. It's no longer prohibited. Now it created standards and it created the ability of free trade between states, interstate commerce, etc.
Totally.
Like, so do you see, when you say remove, do you see this as being treated like removing prohibition of alcohol, or is there another, is there a nutraceutical route? Like, I'm just trying to, and I don't know what the right answer, I'm just trying to get your opinion on
Yeah,
this
that's
as
great.
president for the day.
To be honest, I don't actually believe in the criminalization of any drug. Really, I believe that it can all be, well regulated in the hands of well-meaning people and have things tested for safety and purity. If you could produce like safe heroin and not have to get cartels for and fentanyl laced stuff, then why not have that regulated and set out there? And so, the ideal thing is to not just have it descheduled, but I did mean to add that there should be regulations around it regarding the purity, quality standards, control that can be, on a national level. And then there are some state specific things, but there really needs to be a national agenda that makes things very approachable for research and sale and commerce and banking. All of these are severely hindering, handicapping problems. And it's important to realize that it's just like drug use is not a moral failing. That's unfortunately what people think it is, and it's not. We're just humans. So I don't know. I just don't support criminalizing that, but I do support having safety standards and national standards for trade, commerce, purity, potency, adequate labeling, transparency, licensing of dispensaries. Having medical recommendations and medical cards available is a good idea, but having them be, having all states have reciprocal, recognition of somebody from another state having the cannabis card, that should be totally allowed. And then also funding for more research studies for all of these drugs and things that have been just so widely oppressed but have been an inextricable part of human existence for millennia.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on regulation, but we have this capitalistic system in the United States that must put things into buckets. So all of a sudden, I live in California, so all of a sudden we have recreational cannabis and the medical cannabis went away. So now when you go to a dispensary, for the most part, you can find any concentrate of very high Delta 9 percentages. You have shatter, you have all these different extracts. But if I want a product that is, I don't know, a 4-to-1, maybe THC to CBD, or vice versa, a 1-to-4 with a certain terpene profile, very hard to find, which is a therapeutic dose that maybe is specific to the condition that me or maybe my parent, one of my parents needs to have for their condition, whatever it is that you as a healthcare professional recommended. So, do you feel that by removing prohibition altogether, removing it from and having standards, but now do you need multiple paths for a medical or therapeutic use versus this whole notion of recreational, which I never really understood why anything would be recreational? You're 21 and over or 18 or whatever the law is. You want to use it for whatever purpose you use it for. It's not recreation is a game, a sport. You're not using it for recreational purposes. You're using it with intent. So I never understood that kind of law. So I just want to get your thoughts on, is there going to be a dual path? Because one of the things that was presented by the administration is rescheduling. Well, rescheduling has its own. So what are you going to do? You can't use it recreational now if it's rescheduled, because you need to have a doctor's note that you can take it. So I just want to get your thoughts on how that would work.
Today's it would require an evolution of today's dispensary model, and require stronger regulations for dispensaries to have doctors on staff, have pharmacists on staff, have cannabis educators on staff, and I like that there is separate lines for these patients, and that's all great, because then you can take your time and whatever. But dispensaries, in my view, are not truly medically focused, because if they were, like you said, we would have a wider array of formulations, blends, preferences for MC2 oil versus coconut oil. MC2 oil versus olive oil versus avocado oil. We would have all of these things available. We would have essentially like compounding dispensaries that could make something for you, where your doctor would presumably know enough to write on there, you should try 1-to-1 THC CBD with calming terpenes, and that would mean and check off myrcene, linalool, etc., and that they would know enough to mark that on, or at least that they could give you a recommendation and say, okay, even if I don't know what you should take, you should see someone like me, like Dr. Abe, a cannabis educator, who will tell you, explain to you what your options are, where you are, how much to take, and how often. And that's what I do with people. I will look at the local dispensary menus with them, and I will also explain what's in store for THC products versus also what's available online for hemp products. And then I also have my own, affiliated hemp manufacturers that I recommend most often and have the most success with too. But the dispensary model, I think, should have more catering to the medical need than beyond the what they call the bartender. But having doctors and pharmacists and educators on staff to if a medical patient comes in and has no idea, to be able to have a quick consultation with someone on the staff who's qualified to talk to them about this, and then make recommendations. And then next level would be to have compounding formulations. That would be ultimate.
But why would we even need a dispensary model if cannabis just becomes legal? We already have pharmacies, we already have pharmaceutical products, we already have over-the-counter, we already have nutraceuticals, we already have supplements. Why do we need this notion of a whole other way to be able to get my supplements? Like, to me, cannabis is my supplement. I take it along with my other supplements. So I have my tincture of my own formulation, along with my quercetin, along with my vitamin D3. I can go buy it in a store, a vitamin shop. Why do we need this whole dispensary model? And to add to that question is, as a healthcare professional, and if you're writing a recommendation, do you write a recommendation that somebody should be smoking a combustible cannabis? And how do you control the ratios of those cannabinoids? Because you're not compounding it, it's a plant.
Right.
So
and you alluded to the answer. It's a plant, and this plant that has over 750 known whole plant compounds, and this is why you can make a pharmacy in and of itself, which is called a dispensary, because in the regular, and it's also about quality control. Really, craft cannabis or good quality cannabis products require a lot of special attention, and require special facility, require special security, and all those things need to be tracked and traced and handled appropriately to prevent bad things from happening. But really, it's about quality control and being able to focus in on the cannabis and not have it as like a side thought or afterthought, like at the gas stations or or even at grocery stores that have hemp products aren't necessarily the best hemp products. And how would you know that as a consumer? You don't. And so having it's not that I only want cannabis medically gatekept, because I agree with you. Like any cannabis use, I call this therapeutic. I call it therapeutic cannabis use, because you're using it for stress, for anxiety, for social bonding, for unwinding, for your mental health. Those are all, you are receiving benefits from using it that better improve your quality of life and your social life. And so, I'm not necessarily saying it's, only medical cards and, we got to keep people, I got to keep prescribing it to you, so you keep coming back to me. I'm really here to try to put myself out of business. I want to teach you how to drive your own boat on it, so that you can go off and make your own educated decisions by knowing things like basic things like chemotypes. What's the difference between a type 1 or type 2 type of cannabis, and getting people away from the indica sativa hybrid model, which is an outdated model that is kind of arbitrary.
Well, what about these names that we give these?
Yeah, there are over
varieties?
700 colorful breeder names that
How
mean
about
nothing.
Alaskan Thunderfuck? Grandma Mary's going to come in. Excuse me, I would like to have a gram of this Alaskan Thunderfuck. Like, come on. How do we ever get out of the dark ages of
Right.
this is a therapeutic product if we're going to continue the cycle of calling this wonderful plant these ridiculous names that have no association with what it actually does?
Yeah, exactly. And they can be very off-putting for newcomers as well. I mean, who wants to be, their doctor recommend cheetah piss to them? Like,
It's one of my favorites.
Or green crack, which is something that I had before my wife came over that motivated me to clean my, apartment before she showed up on our first date. And it was very motivating for her to stay
Very
with me.
sativa dominant, yeah.
But, telling her later that it was green crack, and she was like, what? And I'm like, it's just cannabis. But going beyond those names, the way to do that is to and this is why I encourage patients to look at what's called the certificate of analysis, the COA, which is a lab report for each cannabis product. I tell them that it's really the more scientific way to go about it than strain names is to note the top 3 or 4 cannabinoids that are present in there, and then the top 3 or 4 terpenes that are present in there to have a more accurate picture of what you actually because there's 750 compounds to keep track of, but probably the most prominent ones are cannabinoids and terpenes. Those are ones that are most often on the reports too. And so being able to know that I like strains that have higher amounts of, THC and CPG, or I like strains that have more energizing citrus type terpenes, or I like, different routes, or I need different kinds of other oils, and so having those options is really important.
I want to ask you one more question about the differences. You're still the cannabis czar for the day, or the president of the United States, and you have cannabis that has all these different components. You mentioned over 750, and then you have psilocybin, psilocybin.
Yeah,
Wouldn't
simpler.
it be much easier to legalize something that has one component versus the complexity of cannabis? Is that sort of the direction that I follow the money sometimes, and I see where investments are going, and people are like, "Nah, we're not going to invest in cannabis. It's too complicated. The legalities and all that stuff. They may never figure it out." But with psilocybin or LSD or some of that, you're focusing on a component. You're focusing, even though there's no real receptor binding there, but there is we can go into how psilocybin works. But do you think, because cannabis is so complicated and such an amazing plant that there's different things for different people, is it that it's Achilles' heel that's preventing it from actually getting legalized?
It really is the politics. At the end of the day, it's the golden rule. The one with all the gold makes all the rules. And all these divisions are arbitrary. Cannabis is one species. What we call cannabis and hemp are just arbitrary labels defined by law by 0.3%, but that is not how nature works. This is one plant, and the way to do the research on it is, I think, by best categorizing by chemotype, like I've mentioned before. Like, okay, these patients used type 1 chemotypes, or THC dominant, or people use type 2 or then type 3 chemotype. This is kind of how we stratify information on CannaKeys as well, to make things more approachable, because that really is, right now, for now, the best approach is to divide by chemotype, which is predominant cannabinoid, and then chemovars include the terpenoid fingerprint of it. And so by having people note on the COAs what is their top cannabinoid and terpene profiles, they can take that recommendation or that information to any dispensary and be like, hey, I'm looking for something that feels like or has these, because it really helps me with the pain, the anxiety, etc. And because the people who are truly, or the people who are have severe medical needs will seek out that information. And so it's best to have the dispensaries have more qualified, professionally trained staff to address these things and better guide the patients, because I do meet an unfortunate number of patients who have had a bad experience from a bartender recommendation or suggestion. And I'm like, oh no, why did you take 20 milligrams if you're 80 years old? Like, of course they freaked out. And so I'm like, we got to start low, like 2.5 milligrams or something like that, and see how it goes. But yeah, it's because everything is so hodgepodge, causing a lot of its own problems with the industry.
Yeah.
And yeah, you get it.
Oh yeah, I mean it's exactly what it is, and for the lack of education, the whole bud tender model, the lack of C of A's that are consistent across every state. I mean, you're absolutely right. I agree with you. Concur about the cannabinoid ratio and the terpene profile. How many dispensaries and how many cultivators are actually providing those type of C of A's? They're looking for whatever the state regulations are. Maybe there's microbial, et cetera, heavy metals, but terpenes aren't required. I'm not going to do it because it's an extra $180 for me to
Right.
test that. So I'm not going to do that. But if I'm coming in and I want a therapeutic dose and I don't know what's going on in the plant, what am I going to get? So I'm asking the bud tender what they like, and maybe they're a dabber. So they're going to say, "Hey, grandma, what I'm going to
Yeah,
recommend
hit this
a
900
dab
degree
in
nail
for
for
you."
me.
So yeah, look, the industry has its challenges, but we've also come a long way. And I think that the more work that you're doing, the more education that we can all do, and the demand that we have as consumers to go into dispensaries, to go into cultivators and say, I want to have consistency of product. I want C of A's, and this whole notion. The first thing you said with this, there's not enough research. That's my biggest pet peeve as well. I mean, just Google it or ask your Chat GPT. You'll spend a month going through all the research that's out there, and
Years.
you'll never catch up. Right? I mean, you'll never catch up. It'll keep
Yeah.
going and going and going. So
Yeah, just to give you an idea, it took me 3 years to review all 300 plus medical conditions on Cannabis. Everything from from anxiety to X syndrome and whatever. It's just like, and it took me 3 years to get through, and I'm starting in from the top, and I'm just like seeing it grow exponentially, seeing more high quality RCTs being done. We had the first CBG RCT done by Russo et al. That came out last year, and that's I'm really big fan of CBG these days for anxiety for these kinds of reasons, and so that research is all pushing us forward, and educating people is really how I've done the majority of my advocacy work, and I do it in mass, and I do it one-on-one. So if people want to learn more, just check out my website, my portfolio, drabe.io, and you'll see everything. You can also book an appointment with me if you'd like.
Amazing. So I have a few questions to shift gears a little bit, mostly music related that I ask all my guests. So
okay, cool.
Let's see if we can get some cool answers from you. Do you remember, and if so, the very first concert that you attended, what that was?
The very first concert, I went to a Christian rock concert at Six Flags. I mostly enjoyed the theme park and the time with my friends. But I'm not a huge concert person. That was definitely the first one I attended to.
What was the last concert you attended?
Was back in I was visiting some friends in New York. We went to a concert where I forget the artist, but it was all 8-bit style music. These are all modern musicians playing music in 8-bit style, and so it was just like a really interesting underground thing happening somewhere at a warehouse in a seedy warehouse in New York City.
Interesting.
But we had a great time.
All right, so one more music question. For the next year, you could only listen to 5 albums. Now, you don't have to remember the name of the album. It can just be an artist, like I have Amy Winehouse behind me, just as an example. What would be those 5 albums?
Can I go artist or?
Yeah. You can go artist. You don't have to remember the name.
I'm into a lot of weird music. I'm into a lot of down tempo electronic, liquid trap, house trance type music. And so, but I also really like chill. So I like Tycho. Tycho is a really great band that does really chill ambient music. I also really got into Macro Blank lately, which I never discovered before, but I'm also really into vaporwave music. So Macro Blank and that kind of vaporwave variety is like what I listen to. I listen to all the time chill wave and chill synth live radio on YouTube. And so those are definitely my favorite ones to just. I listen to synthwave in the background as I do everything. It's like the soundtrack to my life.
Cool. All right. So final question. Please describe what your room looked like growing up.
My room, it was, it was an old timey, because we lived in a house that was almost like 200 years old in downtown Boston next to the church. So it was about the same age. So if you can picture kind of old New England style room with like kind of like wooden floors that are like look like they're from a barn or something, a radiator that was like a really old school type of radiator that would like burn you if you touched it, and the walls are just white. The whole house has to be white because it's that's the rule. But we also had I remember we had freezing pipes in the winter. We did not have the money to keep the heating on all the time, and I remember taking a lot of cold baths in that house. The house actually should have been condemned before we moved in. Honestly, they discovered later. But yeah, it was just old timey New England style home that was pretty rundown, but has its old charm. It's been fixed up since then. But that was the reality for me for a long time.
Any artwork or posters or anything on the wall that was distinguishing that you can recall, or nothing like that?
When I was in 8th grade, we did like a career for a day. And so I decided to email the people at Lamborghini Boston because I was super into it. And so I just emailed them like, hey, I'm in 8th grade and I'm doing a career day. Can I come and shadow you guys? And I really just want to see, the cars. I did a separate career day with some doctors at another time. But before then, I was really into cars and stuff. And so I remember they also gave me this really beautiful poster of a 2010 Lamborghini Gallardo, the Superleggera edition.
Oh, yeah.
And so the Superleggera has been like my childhood dream car. So I had that poster on my wall for many, many years. And they also gave me some other cool memorabilia. So they were actually really pretty nice people.
Super cool. Well, I'm sure that, being a cannabis doctor will get you that Lamborghini very quickly. Very lucrative.
No, I don't think so. Like I said, I'm trying to put myself out of business, and it's good. It's working.
Gotcha. Dr. Abe, where can people, you mentioned, I want you to mention again, where can people engage with you, where they can find you, where can they read your research, or where can get you, engage you for your services as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The best place to start is my website, drabe.io. That's drabe.io. And you can see my portfolio there where I highlight the Doctor's Corner blog that I created I've created a series called Cannabis Across Life, which is, if you're at any age group, you can find the corresponding article for your age group, and in there I have listed out the the up-to-date information about that is most relevant to cannabis in that age group. So cannabis for anyone from pregnant individuals all the way to palliative and end of life care. And so I'd highly recommend people go check out that series. It's something you can share. And then also on my portfolio, you can also find specific writings, evidence-based writings that I have on many different cannabinoids, and major and the minor ones. And then also you can see, check out Cannabis. If you're a healthcare professional or you're really serious about medical research, I highly recommend the subscription to Cannabis 360. And you can get a 1-week free trial using the link on my website.
Great. And for my audience, I want to thank you for listening. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, follow, all those other good things. And I really appreciate all the feedback, and please keep the 5-star reviews coming. It helps me keep going. And thank you for buying my book, Making Cannabis Personal, on Amazon or wherever you get books. Just want to say, Abe, I mean, being out there, first of all, being a cannabis doctor and somebody that's looking at the endocannabinoid system, I think comes with its challenges, and I really appreciate you being on the forefront of this research because people really, really need it. And I
Thank
really
you.
want to thank you for being on and sharing your journey with our audience. So thanks so much.
Wow, thank you. I can't even tell you how much those words mean to me after all these years. Thank you so much, and I'm so happy to see so many other doctors starting to wake up to this and and realize that there's a lot more to it than they gave it credit for. So thanks for having me on and allowing me to share that with your audience.
Hey, everyone. So, does anybody know what greening out means? I've been the recipient of so many calls over the years of people greening out. That means they took too much THC and had an adverse reaction. So, I always recommend other things, but nothing really concrete. Now, I can. There's a solution. It is called Antidose. Antidose.com is quick, it's rapid, it works immediately, safe, and effective. So I love my props. If you are toasty or you are burnt, that's the difference. Now, I also love the 1 gummy, 2 gummy, 3 gummy floor. So just be aware, very narrow therapeutic window. You know exactly what you can take now if you've taken too much. Once again, it's Antidose at antidose.com. Get yours today. Hey, everyone. Thank you for watching and listening. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button, share this episode, and hit that bell. Like, comment. I so appreciate that. And check me out on social under Len May or Len May DNA. Find out more on LinkedIn or lenmaycoaching.com. And remember, everything is personal.